Dr. Strangelove once said that the whole point of the doomsday machine is lost if you keep it a secret. And whilst this may be true in Hollywood, where the villain must unveil their plan to the audience before their inevitable defeat, in real life villains tend to remain in the shadows, ever fearful of discovery. And there is one man who hid in the darkness better than almost any other, accomplishing feats of geopolitical villainy so morally bankrupt, even snidely Whiplash thought, crikey, he's a bit on the evil side. We're not burying the lead on this one. This is a man who built an international nuclear black market that went undiscovered for almost 2 decades. This is a man who successfully gave nuclear weapons to 3 nations. If he had fully accomplished his goals, it would have been 5. This is a man who wasn't even totally against selling nuclear weapons to Al-Qaeda. And to top it all off, he got away with it. The greatest nuclear proliferator in human history is someone you've probably never heard of, Abdul Qadeer Khan. Abdul Qadeer Khan, or as we will refer to him henceforth, Khan or AQK, was born in 1935 in the Indian city of Bhopal to a Muslim family. Not much is known about his childhood other than that he was a studious individual who worked hard during his education. He moved to Pakistan in 1952 at the age of just 16 and set up a new life with his family once he had completed his schooling. And it's here that we gain our first insight into the motivations driving Khan's actions decades later. 1952 was just 5 years after the hastily orchestrated partition of British India, the fallout of which is regarded as one of the most tragic events in modern political history. Pakistanis and Indians, who were religiously and ideologically opposed, had already gone to war over the territory of Kashmir. There was a lot of hatred between both peoples, and the partition led to Pakistani minorities being harassed in India and vice versa, leading to mass exoduses of Indians and Pakistanis to their respective new nations. Brutal violence towards both groups was common, and it was very likely that a young AQK was affected by this during his childhood. There were reports at the time of train carriages completely filled with corpses, innocents killed on both sides for no other reason than who they were. The Independent reports that a vast painting depicting red flames and the last train to Pakistan was still hanging on Khan's office wall in 2004. It clearly left a lasting impression. All right, let's take a quick break to talk about your personal data. Did you know that there are companies out there, data brokers and people search sites collecting, storing and selling everything from your home address to your browsing habits? After major data breaches like the recent Blackbuster ransomware attack on BT Group's conferencing division, your info might be floating around out there for anyone from marketers to scammers to snatch up. And cleaning up that mess, it's nearly impossible on your own, all right? And that's where Incogni steps in. Incogni is like your personal bouncer for the internet. It contacts data brokers on your behalf, demands they delete your information, and keeps them in check by following up regularly. Think of it as having a tireless privacy advocate working in your corner. Here's how it works. You sign up and you tell Incogni whose data to remove. That's your data, by the way. You give them permission to act for you, and then you sit back and relax while Incogni handles objections and updates you every step of the way. It's quick, it's effective, and honestly, bit of a relief. And it will save you a huge amount of time because you don't want to be emailing hundreds of data brokers, do you? And the results speak for themselves. One user shared how scammers got a hold of their details from a people search site, address, relatives, the works. After signing up for Incogni, the nightmare ended. So protect yourself before it's too late. Head to incogni.com/warfronts and use the promo code WARFRONTS to get 60% off an annual plan. Small price to pay for peace of mind. Thank you to Incogni for sponsoring, and now back to today's episode. Khan graduated from the University of Karachi in 1960 with a bachelor's degree in physics. He then went on to Europe to pursue further studies, spending time in the Netherlands before eventually completing a doctorate in metallurgical engineering from the University of Leuven in Belgium around 1972. He eventually found a job in the early 70s working for Urenco at the Physics Dynamic Research Laboratory in Almelo, a city in the eastern Netherlands. The British, Dutch and German governments had set up a lab known as FDO to provide equipment for enriching uranium. And in the business of YouTube, we call this foreshadowing. Khan's keen academic interest in nuclear science alongside his fervent nationalism only grew when in 1974 India conducted its first nuclear test, known as Operation Smiling Buddha. It is here where, through fear for his country facing nuclear blackmail from its greatest rival, the Khan made a choice. He was going to build a nuclear weapon for Pakistan to rebalance the scales. Khan wrote to then Pakistani Prime Minister Zulfikar al-Bhutto, offering his services as someone well-versed in nuclear science and enrichment technology. At the same time, at FDO, Khan was tasked with translating the German-designed G1 and G2 centrifuge blueprints from German to Dutch. Khan's time in Europe had seen him become fluent in both languages, and as one of the few multilingual people with the experience to translate such delicate designs, he was allowed to do so alone. According to the New York Times, he was left unsupervised for 16 days, more than enough time to gather all of the information he needed. Around this time, Prime Minister Bhutto responded to AQK, asking him to come to Pakistan through a covert channel to meet him in Islamabad. According to Qadeer Nazi, former member of the National Assembly of Pakistan, cabinet minister in the Bhutto administration and author of the insider biographical work The Last Days of Premier Bhutto, the Prime Minister asked Khan to build a nuclear weapon for Pakistan. Khan agreed. Bhutto believed that with the nuclear non-proliferation treaty soon coming into effect, if Pakistan didn't get the bomb now, then they never would. By October 1975, Khan's actions were starting to arouse suspicion. He was transferred away from enrichment work when Dutch authorities became concerned over his activities. Similarly, the New York Times reported Khan asking suspicious questions at a nuclear trade show in Switzerland. However, despite Dutch authorities being hot on his heels, it was already too late. In December of 1975, AKQ suddenly returned to Pakistan, landing in Karachi with only 3 large boxes. According to Niazi, the only things in the boxes were personal notes scribbled from memory. This included copied blueprints for centrifuges and other technologies, as well as the contact information for around 100 companies that supplied centrifuge components and materials. He was set up in a lab in Islamabad with one instruction: build the bomb. Khan was set up in the Qadeer research laboratories and given express autonomy to deliver Pakistan a nuclear weapon. Niazi states that AQK made a commitment that within 7 years he would bring Pakistan up to par with other world powers in nuclear energy. Interestingly, Khan's own website, where he had written blog pages of his experiences, corroborates this. He stated, "Some people advised me to lie to Mr. Bhutto that the bomb would be ready in 3 years. I refused, knowing very well that he would have formulated his foreign policy on that premise, and that could have been disastrous for the country." Whilst it's highly important to take his words with an entire dump truck full of salt, after all, the man himself can hardly be considered an unbiased source, it speaks to his patriotism being a motivator for his actions. It's also strange to see a renowned nuclear proliferator and criminal speak so openly about developing Pakistani nuclear weapons. This would actually become a theme, as Khan often spoke to the media over the course of his life, once his nuclear secrets were no longer secrets. Just remember that Khan is not exactly the most reliable narrator and had a penchant of talking in such a way that painted him in a positive light. We will be quoting the Doctor from time to time, so do just keep that in mind. So, AQK was in Pakistan building the bomb and was given whatever resources he needed to do it. He was able to get blueprints for a Urenco-made centrifuge and eventually developed a working prototype adapted from the German G1 design. He called this new system the P1. How very original. Throughout his time working at the Qadeer Research Lab, Khan was able to procure the materials and components he needed for a nuclear device from both domestic and international sources. Pakistan has a reserve of uranium, with several mines throughout the nation, and with the backing of the Pakistani government acquiring some for future enrichments, it was very easy. He was also able to procure supplies from companies all over the world. Through a setup of multinational companies and shell corporations, Khan was able to gather the supplies he needed with little suspicion. Goods often traveled through the UAE, which has been considered a smuggler's haven for decades owing to its status as a trading hub with lax shipping regulations. AQK just so happened to have a brother who lived in Dubai who could help him cover his tracks. Similarly, at the time, many components and materials used to make nuclear weapons were, and still are, considered dual use for peaceful nuclear power development as well as nuclear weapons. This means that it can be harder to control and track these materials, which offered Pakistan plausible deniability in its atomic ambitions. The Independent have quoted Khan as having said, "If you stop me from buying from Pakistan, then I will buy elsewhere. But I will buy it because I need it, and I can buy it." Pakistan was eventually able to get its hands on Chinese nuclear weapon blueprints from when China conducted its 4th nuclear test in 1966. Today, Chinese and Pakistani officials vehemently deny that any transfer of information occurred, but given the similarities between Pakistan's first nuclear test and China's 1966 test, it is highly likely that the two states cooperated in some way on nuclear technology. Pakistan and China were collaborating more at the time, owed to their mutual disdain towards India. Khan was remarkably successful in his nuclear weapons development and uranium enrichment backed by the Pakistani state. It's unknown exactly when Pakistan became nuclear capable, but under almost total secrecy, the program continued until 1998, when a week after India had conducted another nuclear test, Pakistan detonated a nuclear device for the first time in Shanghai, Balochistan, announcing Pakistani nuclear parity with the rest of the world. Khan was lauded by his nation as the man who had put Pakistan back on a level pegging with India. The state saw his contributions the same way, rewarding him with countless official decorations, including 13 solid gold medals and various public honors. In 2001, AQK was further rewarded when he was promoted to the inner circle of the country's military leadership under General Pervez Musharraf as the leader's special science and technology advisor. But Abdul Qadeer Khan had a dark secret. During his time developing Pakistan's nuclear weapons program, it wasn't the only nation he was helping secure an atomic destiny. What would eventually be uncovered would be a truly shocking network of nuclear proliferation across multiple countries to whom the George W. Bush administration would later describe as rogue states. He may have won the medals, but you're about to learn why Dr. Khan was no hero. The mid-1980s is commonly believed to be when AQK's nuclear proliferation started. That is, if you don't count his work already done in secret under direct Pakistani authority. The very autonomy granted to him by Islamabad to develop the weapon in the first place had also allowed him to set up a clandestine global network of nuclear secret sharing. In the 1980s, Khan started exporting components and materials to other nations. He was also able to use his previously established group of shell companies and the lax Emirati shipping system to act in almost complete secrecy, away from foreign governments' prying eyes. The New York Times asserts that this decision to start exporting, which accompanied an order of twice the necessary components for the domestic Pakistani nuclear program, was completely missed by Western intelligence sources at the time, who assumed Khan was only working on Pakistan's domestic program. They were wrong. They were very wrong. AQK was able to operate a network of nuclear proliferation for around 2 decades, supplying multiple nations with the means to eventually develop nukes of their own. Now, we're not going to talk about each country individually, but AQK is accused of giving nuclear secrets to Iran and North Korea, while also attempting to provide Libya and Iraq with the building blocks of nuclear annihilation. Iran was one of the first beneficiaries of AQK's proliferation network. The P1 centrifuge that Khan designed was the exact same design that found its way into Iranian hands in the late 80s. Khan even made a deal with Iran to help build a cascade of 50,000 P1s, according to the New York Times. The development of new technology meant that Pakistan's P1s were obsolete, with Khan selling the surplus equipment for profit. In 1994, the New York Times also reported that 2 containers of gas centrifuge parts from Dr. Khan's labs were shipped through Dubai to Iran for about $3 million worth of UAE currency. When one of Iran's P1 centrifuges was found to be contaminated with enriched uranium by the International Atomic Energy Agency, Iran was forced to implicate Khan or claim they had developed it themselves. The Iranians stated they bought the centrifuges from a third party, but AQK's hand was evident in the following analysis. For his trouble, The Independent asserts that Iran granted Khan a villa on the Caspian Sea together with lucrative fishing rights in return for his nuclear secrets. Khan's own confession also placed him at the heart of negotiations with North Korea in a trade for nuclear secrets. Pakistan gave North Korea secrets and potentially even enrichment technology in return for their knowledge on ballistic missiles in what must have been the most dangerous trade deal in the history of trade deals. This is corroborated by Pakistani-developed Gauri missiles being based on North Korea's Nondong missile design, which itself comes from the Soviet Scud missiles design. The New York Times reports that in 1990, a Greek intermediary offered Iraqi dictator Saddam Hussein's regime an atomic bomb design from Dr. Khan. The intermediary also guaranteed material support for uranium enrichment from Western Europe in keeping with Khan's modus operandi. A leaked Iraqi memo that found its way into the hands of the UN suggests that Khan wanted considerable payment for this technology. Eventually, Iraq declined, suspecting the offer of being part of a Western sting operation, although a more practical reason may be that the Gulf War was right around the corner and the discovery of potential Iraqi weapons of mass destruction could put the world's superpowers on high alert, as it would just 13 years later. It was even reported by The Independent again that in 2001, leaked al-Qaeda documents seized in Afghanistan suggested that Dr. Khan's protégés had been briefing Osama bin Laden's associates in nuclear matters. This is also the one thing AQK didn't admit in his confession, so there is speculation on how much Khan and al-Qaeda were involved. We know al-Qaeda had nuclear ambitions at the time and sought nuclear expertise. Whilst there is no evidence to suggest Khan was directly involved or that al-Qaeda received any nuclear material whatsoever, if they were going to get it from anywhere, it was from Khan. And finally, we come to Libya, where in 2003, the extent of Khan's nuclear proliferation network would finally be discovered. Soon, the whole world would know what he had done. Libya was well known under eccentric dictator Muammar Gaddafi as a nation with nuclear ambitions. Throughout the 90s, they had taken Khan's equipment and know-how in exchange for millions of dollars, to the extent that they could now develop 10 nuclear weapons every year, according to the New York Times. Libya had officially given up their nuclear program following the US invasion of Iraq in 2003. However, it appears that Gaddafi's regime wasn't totally honest in doing so. Authorities from multiple intelligence agencies, like the CIA and MI6, had finally caught wind of something happening in the Libyan nuclear space, although authorities had been tracking Khan for years at this point. A German-flagged ship called the BBC China, bound for Libya in late summer of 2003, was intercepted by German, Italian, US, and British forces. It was taken to an Italian port for inspection. Centrifuges were discovered labeled machine parts that had come from Malaysia, where Khan had set up several front companies. Much like in Iran, these centrifuges were Khan's P1 and P2 designs. AQK's network had just been exposed. Surely, now the following investigations would see him locked away forever for giving nuclear secrets to rogue states. Right? Well, no, not exactly. Following an investigation, debrief, and increased international pressure from other nations towards Pakistan, Abdul Qadeer Khan appeared on live Pakistani television to confess to his crimes. A small excerpt from the confession reads as follows. The investigation has established that many of the reported activities did occur and that these were inevitably initiated at my behest. In my interviews with the concerned government officials, I was confronted with the evidence and the findings, and I have voluntarily admitted that much of it is true and accurate. My dear brothers and sisters, I have chosen to appear before you to offer my deepest regrets and unqualified apologies to a traumatized nation. He finished his confession by proclaiming, "May Allah keep Pakistan safe and secure. Long live Pakistan." Great. Now we have a confession as well. I mean, what could possibly stop this man from spending a considerable amount of time behind bars? Well, there would be a presidential pardon. Following Khan's confession of his proliferation network to the world, then Pakistani President Pervez Musharraf pardoned AQK less than 24 hours later, announcing, "I have decided to pardon Dr. AQ Khan, who is our national hero, but has made mistakes, which is unfortunate. Whatever I have done, I have tried to shield him." David Kay, former US Chief Weapons Inspector, said at the time, "I can think of no one who deserves less to be pardoned." The pardon cleared Khan of all wrongdoing and precluded a trial, meaning that he would never have to answer for what he had done. He didn't get off totally scot-free, but given the scope of his crimes, he may as well have. President Musharraf had Khan placed under house arrest. There was significant international interest in bringing Khan to justice, but the Pakistani government wouldn't hear it. They couldn't have a national hero tried in a foreign court. Pakistani officials refused US requests to allow them or the IAEA to question Khan. Whilst Khan's network was dismantled, shipping offices closed, and factories shuttered, Khan himself was out of reach. Worse still, his house arrest and his cushy home in Islamabad didn't last. By 2009, a series of relaxations on his confinement eventually concluded, with Khan being granted his freedom. Although, if he ever exited Pakistan again, he may well have been handed over to international authorities. His cell had essentially expanded to the 882,000 square kilometer nation of Pakistan. 5 years in your house and no foreign holidays is hardly a high price to pay for a man who attempted to share nuclear secrets with 5 nations. Pakistan's foreign ministry acknowledged the end of Khan's confinement, but said Islamabad will take, quote, all necessary measures to promote the goals of non-proliferation. Other nations were not happy. Jeffrey G. Lewis, director of the Nuclear Strategy and Non-Proliferation Initiative at the New America Foundation, said Khan's ability to essentially walk away from nuclear smuggling charges, quote, makes a mockery of our efforts to stop the spread of nuclear weapons, end quote. David Albright, a former UN nuclear inspector who has spent years studying the network, told the Washington Post that, quote, Khan remains a serious proliferation risk, continuing that he likely still has or can access sensitive nuclear technology. He certainly knows how to organize nuclear smuggling internationally. Worse still, the discovery of nuclear weapons blueprints on computers found in Switzerland and Dubai, reported in a Washington Post feature, prompted questions about whether the damage inflicted by Khan's network was truly contained or even understood. Unfortunately, we'll never know, as in 2021, Abdul Qadeer Khan caught COVID-19, he was hospitalized in Pakistan, and eventually died at the age of 85, likely taking what remained of his secrets to the grave. When we talk about Abdul Qadeer Khan, there are a number of highly important questions that remain unanswered. Maybe most importantly is why. One may be able to understand being the father of nuclear weapons for your own nation, but why would someone sell nuclear secrets to some of the most abhorrent regimes in modern history? Well, the obvious answer to that question is money. Khan knew his network of parts and materials alongside his expertise would be invaluable to some nations. All he had to do was name his price. The Washington Post reported that Khan's lavish lifestyle was, quote, the worst kept secret in town and should have triggered suspicions among those responsible for protecting Pakistan's nuclear secrets. Despite being on an official civil servant salary of $2,000 a month, Khan was spectacularly wealthy. Looking at the case with Iran and the villa they gifted him, it's not hard to see where his money might have come from. Khan was reported by The Independent to have had a collection of vintage cars, 4 luxury homes in Islamabad, real estate in London, multi-million-dollar wedding receptions he hosted for his 2 daughters, and a luxury hotel he built in Timbuktu, Mali, named after his wife. Maybe it was just greed. Khan found himself in a position where he could get everything he ever wanted and more, and so sold his secrets to the highest bidder regardless of who they were. Another reason may also highlight Khan's ambitions and motive, his ego. When he spoke to the media, he boasted of his accomplishments, lauding his achievements and downplaying others' contributions. He takes sole credit for the remarkable feat of turning Pakistan, who Khan described as, quote, a country which couldn't produce bicycle chains, into a nuclear power. For a man so fervently patriotic, that's a strange comment to make. Khan also had an intense desire to have things named after him, from hospitals and universities to the Kahuta research lab where he worked, something he successfully lobbied the Pakistani PM for. The atomic establishment largely considered Khan to be an intellectual lightweight with a megaton ego, prone to exaggerating his expertise. Munir Ahmad Khan, no relation, the former head of the Pakistani Atomic Energy Commission, said of AQK, most of the scientists who work on weapons are serious. They are sobered by the weight of what they don't know. But Khan is a showman. A physicist in Islamabad, A.H. Nair, stated that, quote, he is a hardcore nationalist and a very ambitious person. He is in it for fame and money. The real motive for his proliferation, Khan himself claimed, was to deflect world attention from the nuclear progress of Pakistan and as a gesture of support to other Muslim countries rather than to amass personal wealth. In his 12-page confession, AQK added the defense that he offloaded lots of duds, mostly surplus or outmoded centrifuge parts or rough sketches of machinery. However, as we mentioned, Khan is not a reliable narrator. North Korea is not a Muslim country, and Shia Iran aren't exactly friendly to the Sunni world. It makes Khan's excuse of a grand mission for global Islam ring rather hollow. Khan's own reasons for why he pursued the bomb with Pakistan have also changed over time. In an interview with Newsweek, he made himself crystal clear that it came from a place of deterrence. Quoting here, I would like to make it clear that it was an Indian nuclear explosion in May 1974 that prompted our nuclear program, motivating me to return to Pakistan to help create a credible nuclear deterrent and save my country from Indian nuclear blackmail. The quote ends. However, his explanation for the other proliferations tells us more about his views of the world. In that same Newsweek interview, he stated, don't overlook the fact that no nuclear-capable country has been subjected to aggression or occupied or had its borders redrawn. Had Iraq and Libya been nuclear powers, they wouldn't have been destroyed in the way that we have seen recently. End quote. Of course, Iraq and Libya were both nations that Khan's network had tried to ensure got the bomb. This may indicate an anti-American or anti-Western sentiment, as would his purported connections with Al-Qaeda. Anti-Westernism had become a normal sentiment for many in Muslim countries following the invasions of Iraq and Afghanistan. There is also something to be said about Khan's legacy, defying traditionally hegemonic Western powers in favor of these pariah states and all but getting away with it in the end. Even associates of Khan's, who were part of his network and helped facilitate his proliferation, did not see much jail time, if any jail time at all. One German man was jailed and given a hefty fine for his role in Khan's network, but most of the big fish got away. The breakup of the network was an international masterclass, but the international community's inability to round up those involved and bring them to justice for their roles in some of the most heinous crimes of the modern day is nothing short of absolutely baffling. Whatever Khan's ultimate motive, he was enabled by the Pakistani government, at the very least, to commit the crimes that he did. This reveals another question about Khan's network. How much did the Pakistani government know? How deep did this rabbit hole go? Khan himself said in his confession that he acted without the Pakistani government's knowledge. However, Khan's status as a national hero, his proximity to the state for over 2 decades, and his very swift pardon may suggest otherwise. Islamabad has tried, ever since this news came out, to wash AQK's image and sweep the whole thing under the rug, a move that is deeply suspicious. After gaining his freedom in 2009, a Pakistani government spokesman said that, quote, the so-called AQ Khan affair is a closed chapter. Similarly, during the initial investigation, a British envoy challenged the Pakistani government on Khan, but according to the BBC, he was assured everything was in order. Pakistan's insistence to not let the Americans or the IAEA question Khan doesn't make sense if what he would tell them wouldn't implicate the Pakistani state in any way. If he acted alone, surely Islamabad has nothing to hide. The Washington Post tells a different story, that Khan told investigators that senior government and military officials, including General Pervez Musharraf himself, knew of the network. The Post also asserts that Khan said Musharraf personally had to know of the deal with North Korea at the very least, given Musharraf took over responsibility for the Gari missile program when he became Army Chief of Staff in October 1998. It's really hard to imagine any army general not knowing or asking where these weapons had come from. Such an exchange must have involved government-to-government contracts. As the old adage goes, not a single leaf moves in Pakistan without the knowledge of the army. Prime Minister Bhutto gave the order to build the bomb itself and ultimately set Khan in motion, but he died in 1977, just a year after starting Pakistan's nuclear program. His death may have led to some ambiguity on the Pakistani state's part about just what AQK might have been getting up to. However, from 1977 to 2004, when Khan's network was uncovered, there were 8 different leaders of Pakistan. It's hard to imagine none of them asked what was going on. As for Khan himself, he's been relegated to the annals of history. He is still considered a hero by many in his homeland for helping Pakistan develop nuclear weapons and stopping the state, in Khan's own words, being blackmailed by India. Pakistan's Press Information Department put out a message after the Proliferator died from Syed Fakhar, Minister for National Food Security and Research, that said, Dr. Abdul Qadeer Khan was an iconic person who provided an unassailable security shield for the country, and his services for national defense building will be long remembered. His legacy within Pakistan is largely intact, and his legacy outside of it has been largely forgotten. Khan's actions led to incredibly dangerous consequences, and everyone should know his name. And for him to not only get away with it, but to be forgotten or lauded as a result, is a tragedy.